Imagine it is the 14th of October 2008. You are a 61-year-old high school teacher living in Columbus, Ohio. Your name is Gary. You have been teaching American history for 31 years. You own a modest 3-bedroom house on Elmwood Avenue. You drive a 7-year-old Ford pickup. You have not taken a vacation in 4 years because you were putting every extra dollar into your 401k, the retirement account your employer set up for you back in 1994. You have been disciplined. You have been patient. You watched the account grow from $12,000 to, at its peak 18 months ago, $219,000. That was your number. That was your life. That was 31 years of chalk dust and early mornings and staying after school to help kids who needed it, converted into a number on a screen that was supposed to set you free at 65. This morning, you log in to check it. You do this every few weeks, but something feels different today. The number on the screen reads $141,000, $78,000 gone in 18 months. You sit very still at your kitchen table. The coffee goes cold. If you have ever wondered why millions of Americans do exactly what they were told to do, saved carefully and invested for decades, and still found themselves standing at the edge of retirement with far less than they expected, stay with me. What you are about to hear is not a theory. It is a pattern. It has played out in different countries and different decades under different names, with different numbers, but the ending is almost always the same for the people who never saw it coming. And if this kind of historical clarity matters to you, subscribing takes 2 seconds. It means you will never miss the videos that most people find only after it is too late. Gary's story did not begin in 2008. It began much earlier. It began the day someone handed him a brochure and told him the 401k was the modern American path to retirement security. It began with a promise, and this video is about that promise, what it is built on, who benefits from it, and what history tells us about what happens when the architecture underneath it turns out to be far less solid than the brochure suggested. This is not a video about whether to save money. Saving money is wise. This is a video about the system that was built around your savings, the assumptions baked into it, and the risks that are almost never explained clearly, and the historical record of what happens when those assumptions break down. Because they have broken down before, many times, in many places. And the people who got hurt were almost always the ones who believed sincerely and reasonably that they were doing everything right. Before we go further, there is something important to understand about how the 401k actually works. Because most people, even people who have had one for 20 years, do not fully understand the mechanism. And when you do not understand a mechanism, you cannot see where it can fail. A 401k is a defined contribution plan. Those 3 words are important. Defined contribution, not defined benefit. The old pension system that most workers had before the 1980s was a defined benefit system. Your employer promised you a specific monthly payment in retirement, no matter what happened in the markets. The employer bore the risk. The employer had to fund that promise. You, the worker, were protected from market swings. Then, starting in the late 1970s and accelerating through the 1980s, something changed. Employers began shifting away from defined benefit pensions and toward defined contribution plans. The 401k was born from a 1978 tax code provision, Section 401, subsection K, that almost nobody noticed at the time. It was not designed by workers. It was not designed with workers primarily in mind. It was initially designed as a supplement for executive compensation. Then it became the replacement for the entire pension system. Think of the old pension like a bridge your employer built and maintained for you. They were responsible for making sure it held. The 401k is different. Your employer hands you the materials, maybe contributes some of their own, and you build the bridge yourself. You decide how to build it. You bear the weight of every storm that hits it, and if it collapses, the losses are yours. This shift, from defined benefit to defined contribution, is the root mechanism behind everything we're going to discuss today. It is the foundation on which every risk in this story rests. By 2023, roughly 68 million Americans actively participated in 401k plans. The total assets held in these plans exceeded $7.3 trillion. That is not a small number. That is a number so large it is almost impossible to picture. And nearly all of it is exposed to the risks we are about to walk through. This brings us directly to the first major point of this story and to the first historical case study. Because the risk of depending on market-linked retirement savings is not theoretical. It has already destroyed the retirement plans of millions of real people. In a country that thought its system was safe. The year is 2000. The place is the United States. The vehicle is not a 401k, but something close enough to tell the same story at a smaller scale first. The company is Enron Corporation. At the time, Enron was one of the most celebrated companies in America. It had appeared on Fortune magazine's list of most admired companies for 6 consecutive years. Its stock was traded, discussed, and adored. and tens of thousands of Enron employees had their 401k savings invested heavily in Enron stock. Not because they were reckless, because they were encouraged to. Company matching contributions often came in the form of Enron stock. Employees were told, repeatedly and enthusiastically, that Enron was a safe bet. Some employees had 80, 90, even 100% of their retirement savings in company stock. In December 2001, Enron filed for bankruptcy. It was, at the time, the largest corporate bankruptcy in American history. The stock went from $90 per share to less than $1 in under a year. Employees who had accumulated hundreds of thousands of dollars in retirement savings found themselves with almost nothing. A woman named Janice Farmer, a former Enron employee, testified before Congress that she had lost $700,000 in her retirement account. She was in her late 50s. She had no time to rebuild. She went back to work in a job she had expected never to need again. The mechanism here is concentration risk. When you depend on one company, one stock, one sector for your retirement, you're not diversified. Diversification means spreading your money across many different things so that if one fails, the others might protect you. But the structure of many 401k plans, particularly in the 1990s and early 2000s, made concentration in employer stock both common and encouraged. Enron was not a rogue exception. After Enron, investigations found that similar concentrations existed at WorldCom and Global Crossing, and dozens of other companies whose employees lost retirement savings in the collapse of the early 2000s technology and accounting scandal era. Estimates suggest that between 2000 and 2002, American workers lost approximately $2 trillion in retirement savings as markets and individual stocks collapsed. Enron alone wiped out approximately $2 billion in employee retirement savings. The rot was not in one bad company. The rot was in the design of a system that allowed people to unknowingly stake their entire retirement on the survival of a single employer. And the rules that were supposed to protect them either did not exist or did not apply in time. Here is something I want you to think about before we go further. If you were told today that a significant portion of your retirement account was in assets, that your employer recommended, that you did not fully choose yourself, and that you could not easily move without penalty, would you feel secure? Or would that fact sit differently in your mind now than it did 5 minutes ago? Drop your answer in the comments, seriously. Because what I am about to show you next is the part of this story that most people never hear, and it changes everything. The second major point in this story takes us out of the boardrooms of Houston and into something much larger. Something that swallowed not individual companies, but entire national retirement systems. And it shows that the risk inside your 401k is not just about which stocks you pick. It is about what happens when the entire market structure moves. The year is 2007. The country is Iceland. Iceland had, in the years before the crisis, built one of the most impressive financial expansions in history. Its three major banks had grown to hold assets worth approximately 9 times the entire gross domestic product of the country. GDP means the total value of everything a country produces in a year. Iceland's banks were holding assets worth 9 years of economic output. Icelandic workers had pension funds. They had savings accounts. They had investment vehicles that looked very much like diversified retirement savings. By October 2008, all 3 of Iceland's major banks had collapsed within a single week. The Icelandic stock market fell by approximately 90%. People who had retirement savings in Icelandic bank stocks or in investment funds tied to those banks lost a devastating portion of what they had saved. Inflation shot up. Interest rates were raised to 18% in an attempt to stabilize the currency. The Icelandic krona lost half its value against the euro in a matter of months. An Icelandic fisherman in his late 50s named Sigurdur, interviewed by the BBC in late 2008, described pulling money out of his pension fund at a fraction of what it had been worth because he needed cash to pay basic bills. He had not done anything wrong. He had not made reckless bets. He had saved through the system his country built and told him to trust. The mechanism here is systemic risk. Systemic risk is when the failure is not in one stock, one company, or one decision. It is when the entire financial system itself is the thing that breaks. Your 401k might be diversified across hundreds of stocks. But if those stocks all exist inside the same financial system, and that system experiences a severe shock, diversification provides far less protection. In Iceland, the shock was severe enough that being diversified within the Icelandic financial system offered almost no protection at all. This brings us to the third point, and to a case study that most Americans know about, but very few have examined closely. The year is 2008. The country is the United States. We return to Gary, our teacher in Columbus, but now we zoom out. Between October 2007 and March 2009, the S&P 500 fell by approximately 56%. That means that a 401k account worth $200,000 in October 2007 was worth approximately $88,000 by March 2009. Every dollar that went in during the years before had effectively been cut in half. The Vanguard Center for Retirement Research analyzed the results. They found that participants who were between 56 and 65 years old experienced median account balance declines of approximately 25%, but the average masked enormous variation. Workers in their early 60s with heavy stock exposure saw losses far larger. Approximately 4 million workers who were within 10 years of retirement saw their accounts drop by more than 40%. Here is where this mechanism becomes truly uncomfortable. The 401k system assumes something that history repeatedly shows is not guaranteed. It assumes that you will retire at a time when the market is up, not when it is down. You have no control over when a recession arrives. You have no control over whether a financial crisis lands in the same year you plan to retire. You cannot choose your exit point like your entry. And when you exit a falling market, because you have to, you sell at the bottom. You lock in the losses permanently. The market may recover in 5 years, but if you needed that money in 2009, the recovery that came in 2012 did not help you. Gary logged into his account in October 2008 with 4 years left until retirement. What recovered for younger investors was irrelevant to him. His window had closed. Now here is where it gets interesting, because most people assume the problem was that individuals made bad choices. They chose wrong. They were not careful enough. But now look at all 3 cases together. Look at what they share. In the Enron case, employees were encouraged by the institution managing their savings to concentrate in exactly the wrong place. The design of the plan created the risk. In Iceland, workers saved through a nationally approved system that collapsed beyond their control. In the 2008 crisis, American workers did exactly what the system told them to do. They held diversified index funds and target date funds, and they still lost 40, 50, or 60% of their savings at the precise moment they could least afford to. Most people will never know what you now know. Most people will keep trusting systems they do not understand, because the systems were designed to be trusted without being understood. If you are still here, you're not most people. You are someone who is willing to sit with uncomfortable facts and think them through. Hit subscribe. The next section is crucial. The part that deals not with what happened in distant years, but with who specifically got hurt and who specifically walked away fine. And that difference is the most important thing to understand. The same mechanism, different countries, different decades, same result. The people holding the most exposure to the riskiest part of the system at the worst possible moment are almost always middle-income workers. They are teachers, nurses, factory workers, and administrative staff. They are people who did not have enough money to hire sophisticated advisors. They could not afford to hold a second portfolio of alternative assets. They were entirely dependent on the system working as described, and they are the ones who absorb the losses when the system does not. This brings us directly to the 4th point. The human cost is not evenly distributed. It never is. In the aftermath of 2008, a study found households in the bottom 50% lost more. They lost a dramatically higher proportion of their total net worth than households in the top 10%. The reason why is important. The bottom 50% of American households held most of their wealth in 2 places, their home and their 401k. Both collapsed. The top 10% held wealth in more varied places. They held private equity, which means ownership in companies not publicly traded. They held real assets like commercial property. They held hedge funds. Hedge funds are pools that use strategies unavailable to ordinary investors, sometimes including bets that the market will go down, which means they can make money in a crash. They held international assets. They held things that either did not fall as sharply or actually rose in value during the crisis. The average 401k balance for a near-retirement worker in 2008 was approximately $78,000. That sounds low. It is low. The median was even lower, around $27,000. These are people who saved and followed the rules of the system. And $27,000 at retirement age is not retirement. It is a problem. Meanwhile, institutions manage those funds. The asset management companies, mutual fund providers, and plan administrators collected fees whether the market went up or down. Expense ratios and administrative costs average between 1% and 2% of assets per year across most 401k plans. On a $100,000 account, 1% is $1,000 per year. Over 30 years, fees consume a massive portion. Estimates suggest that fees can consume between 20 and 30% of a retirement account's final value. The risk stays with you. Look at what happened next in countries that went further down this road. The year is 2013. The country is Cyprus. The Cypriot banking system had become dangerously overexposed to Greek government debt. Greek debt had been downgraded to junk status. Cypriot banks were holding enormous quantities of it. When a bailout was arranged, they demanded account holders take a direct loss. This was called a bail-in. In a bail-in, the depositors themselves absorbed the losses. Cypriot depositors lost nearly half their excess savings. Overnight, with bank doors closed and ATM withdrawals capped, Ordinary Cypriots who trusted the system woke up to legal confiscation. This is an extreme example. Cyprus is a small island nation with specific vulnerabilities, but the mechanism is not limited to Cyprus. The idea that savings held within a financial system can be restructured during a system-level crisis is a recurring theme. In Argentina in 2001, pension funds were nationalized. The government transferred private pension assets into government control, replacing them with government bonds that subsequently lost most of their value. Ordinary Argentines saw their savings converted into promises from a government that was simultaneously defaulting on its debts. Estimates suggest they lost between 40 and 80% of real value. In each of these cases, the savers were told the system was safe. In each case, it turned out to be exposed to environmental risk. The question is not whether this pattern will repeat. History has already answered that many times. The question is if you understand the architecture. Understanding the structure well enough to make informed decisions before a stress event arrives rather than after it is critical. If this channel helps you see structures that most people never examine, subscribing costs nothing. Understanding what you are inside matters. The next section tells you what the historical record says about the people who came through these events with their financial lives intact. The record on who survived and who did not is remarkably consistent. It does not produce a single investment recommendation, but a pattern. The first thing history shows is that survivors understood the specific nature of the risks inside their savings vehicle before a crisis arrived. Enron employees who moved their savings away from company stock because they were uncomfortable with concentration came through much better. The employees who diversified did so based on a principle, not a prediction. They were uncomfortable with concentration as a structural feature. That discomfort with the structure was the protective factor. The second thing history shows is survivors held assets outside the primary system. In Iceland, individuals who held foreign currency accounts fared significantly better than those who held everything in domestic assets. In Argentina, individuals who held dollar-denominated accounts outside the local banking system preserved more wealth. The historical record shows that concentration in any single system increases fragility during a stress event involving that system. The third thing the record shows is that survivors tended to have a clear understanding of their actual timeline. People who retired in 2012 instead of 2009 had the flexibility to delay drawing on retirement accounts during the worst of the decline. The research suggests that holding 3 to 5 years of expenses in lower volatility assets provides the flexibility to wait out downturns. This is not a guarantee. It is a pattern. The historical record is not a prescription. Every person's situation is different. What the survivors almost always shared was structural awareness. They understood what they were inside and understood the failure modes. Now we return to Gary. His account was at $141,000 in October 2008. He did not sell. By the time he retired in June 2012, the market had partially recovered and his account was back to $178,000. He lost $41,000 compared to his peak. He adjusted his retirement plans and worked 2 more years. He sold his house and moved into something smaller. He made it work, but it was not what he was promised. Millions of Americans in Gary's position made it work. That adaptability is admirable. But did the brochure match the reality? The 401k is not a fraud. It is a legitimate savings vehicle with tax advantages and real potential to grow wealth over time. But it is also a system with structural limitations that are almost never explained to the people relying on it most heavily. It transfers investment risk from employer to employee and exposes savers to market timing risk and concentration risk. It collects fees in every condition, regardless of performance, and operates within a financial system capable of severe stress events. None of this means the 401k should be abandoned. It means any system this important deserves to be understood completely. The pattern across history is that saving systems fail at moments of maximum stress, harming those most dependent on them. This is historical and educational analysis. It is not financial advice. Consult a qualified, independent fiduciary professional for your situation. Please do that before making any financial decision. This video is for those willing to sit with facts that are not always reassuring. If someone you know needs to hear this, share it with them, subscribe for more, and I will see you in the next one.